Why don't we cover the desert with solar panels? Every day, the sun's necessary deserts reach a temperature up to 18 degrees Celsius. Stretching over roughly 9 million square kilometers, these massive deserts receive about 22 million terawatt-hours of energy from the sun every year. That's well over the 100 times more energy than humanity consumes annually. So, could covering these deserts with solar panels solve our energy problems for good? Solar panels work with the light particle heat that samples with enough energy to knock electrons out of this stable bonus. On the journey back to stability, these electrons produce electricity. However, there's a limit to how much power panels can generate. Solar panels can only interact with a certain wavelength of light that make it impossible to convert over half of the sunlight they receive. But even light particles that can convert often bounce off them without ever hitting an electrode. But thanks to clever scientists and engineers and substantial government investments, solar panels are generating more electricity than ever. And the reflective coating and patterns on the panel surface creates more opportunities for importing light panels to heat electrics. These techniques have increased commercial solar panel efficiency from the low teens to 25%, with experimental models reaching up to 47%. What's more, solar has gotten cheaper over the last decades, thanks in part to global supply chains for other technologies that use the same materials. Together, these factors have made solar power the cheapest source of electricity on Earth. Countries including India, China, Egypt, and the US have already taken these new panels into the desert. Their massive solar farms range from 50 to 56 square kilometers, and when the sun is high in the sky, these plants can provide energy for hundreds of thousands of local residents. But these farms also get extremely hot. Like the solar sun's don't covers and reflects, it's absorbed as heat, which reduces the panel's efficiency. And the cooling system employed by many farms can use the huge amount of energy powered fan or moving water to maintain optimal temperatures. Even with these systems, solar panels in the deserts absorb far more heat than the natural sandy environment. That has been a problem on the scale of these solar farms, but if try to cover the Sahara, these effects can create massive changes in a region's climate. Constructing solar farms already disrupts local ecosystems, but its plant of this scale could dramatically transform the desert landscape. Thankfully, solar panels aren't our only option, and some of the largest solar plants in the world have tried a new approach: giant mirrors. Morocco's Noura power plant, which will eventually cover roughly 30 square kilometers of the Sahara, is the constructed solar power plant. This design reflects light onto the receiver, which converts the energy to heat and then electricity. These mirrors will create a dangerous temperature shift from local wildlife, but they have less potential to sample landscape. And since it takes time for the materials being heated to cool off, these plants often continue producing electricity past the sunset. Whether they use panels or mirrors, industrial solar farms are often easy to fit in existing energy infrastructure. However, getting their electricity beyond the local power grids is much more difficult. Some countries are working on a way to connect electric grids across the globe, and many farms store energy in the massive batteries or convert their electricity into the gas that can be used later. But right now, these techniques are so too expensive and inefficient to rely on. While still, electric renewable can share some of the same problems as fossil fuels, relying on destructive mining operation and the carbon-emitting global supply changes. Fortunately, solar can exist on many scales. From industrial solar farms to smaller installations that power individual buildings or rural communities. These projects can supplement energy use or provide the passive source of energy to regions of the grid. And since the solar panel relies on a few simple components, they're quick to install and relatively easy to update. In fact, this is the flexibility that enabled solar to come to cheap and ubiquitous over the last decade. So if you want to keep up with the humanity rising energy, we'll need to enter the both big and small. What more? Every day, the sands of the Sahara Desert reach temperature up to 18 degrees Celsius. Stretching over roughly 9 million square kilometers, this massive desert receives about 22 million terawatt-hours of energy from the sun every year. That's well over the 100 times more energy that humanity consumes annually. So, could cover this desert with the solar panel solve our energy problems for good? Solar panels work with the light particles hit the surface with nothing energy to knock electrons out of their stable bonds. On the journey back to the stability, these electrons produce electricity. However, there's a limit to how much power a panel can generate. Solar power can only interact with a certain wavelength of light that making it possible to combust over the half of sunlight they receive. And even light particles that can combust often bounce off them without ever hitting an electrode. But thanks to the clever scientists and engineers and substantial government investment, solar panels have generated more electricity than ever. And the rapid coating and the patterns on the panel surface created more opportunities for incoming light particles to hit electrodes. These techniques have increasing commercial solar panel efficiency from the low teens to 25%, with experimental models reaching up to 47%. What's more, solar has gotten 89% cheaper over the last decades, thanks in part to global supply changes for other technologies that use the same materials. Together, these factors have made for solar power the cheapest source of electricity on Earth. Countries including India, China, Egypt, and the US have always taken this new panel into the desert. The massive solar farms range from 50 to 56 square kilometers, and when the sun is high in the sky, these plants can provide energy for hundreds of thousands of local residents. But these farms also get extremely hot. Like the solar sand don't cover to reflects, it's absorbed as heat, which reduces the panel's efficiency. And the cooling system employed by many farms can use the huge amount of energy powering fan or moving water to maintain optimal temperatures. Even with these systems, solar panels in the deserts absorb far more heat than a natural sense environment. This hasn't a problem on the scale of existing solar farms, but if we try to cover the Sahara, this effect creates massive changes in the region's climate. Constructing solar farms already disrupt the local ecosystems, but a plant of this scale could dramatically transform the desert landscape. Thankfully, solar panels aren't our only option. And some of the largest solar panels in the world trying to a new approach, giant mirrors. Morocco's Noor power plant, which will eventually cover roughly 30 square kilometers of the Sahara, is a concentrated solar power plant. This design reflects the light onto the receiver, which converts energy to heat and then electricity. These mirrors will create a dangerous temperature shift for local wildlife, but they have less potential to restore for landscape. And since it takes time for the materials being heated to cool off, these plants often continue producing electricity past sunset. Whether they use panels or mirrors, industrial solar farms are often too easy to fit in existing energy infrastructure. However, getting their electricity beyond the local power grids is much more difficult. Some countries are working on a way to connect the electric grids across the globe, and many farms store energy in massive batteries or convert their electricity into the gas that can be used later. But right now, these techniques are still too expensive and inefficient to rely on. While still industrial renewable can share some of the same problems as fossil fuels, relying on destructive mining operation and carbon-emitting global supply chains. Fortunately, solar can exist on many scales. For industrial solar farms to smaller installations that power individual buildings or rural communities. These projects can supplement energies used provides a passive source of energy the regions of the grid. And since solar panels rely on a few simple components, they're quick to install and relatively easy to update. In fact, it is flexibility that enables solar to become cheap and ubiquitous over the last decade. So if you want to keep up with humanity's rising energy use, we'll need answers both big and small.